Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So as Rob said, my name's Dave Brown. I work for the Microsoft Technology Centre, which is a small team based in the UK, in Reading. And I just wanted to spend just 5 minutes talking to you about an opportunity that you have to engage with Microsoft through the MTC. There are other ways, but I'll hopefully clarify why you might want to engage with the MTC specifically. I've seen some pretty amazing technology today. Many of the technologies I've seen today I hadn't seen before, and I'm certainly pretty inspired. I'm hoping you are too. If there are certain things that you're taking away from today thinking, it would be fantastic to be able to leverage this technology to solve this problem that we have, there may be an opportunity for you to work with us on that. Now, I'll just change my slide. Okay, there we go. So we're based around the world in about 27 locations and growing. We're a relatively small part of Microsoft. In the UK, we're actually part of a wider group called the Developer and Platform Evangelism Team. It's a bit of a mouthful, but really it's a group that just works with the latest technologies that Microsoft has at any one particular time. So right now we're doing a lot of work with cloud, a lot of work with Windows 8, a lot of work with Phone 8, and some of the newer natural user interface technologies such as Connect as well. We have a manager, 3 architects. I'm one of the architects in the team, a briefing coordinator, and a couple of lab engineers. But we have a dedicated team. This is all we do. We have a dedicated facility. And in that facility, we have a reasonably well-spec'd data center that's our own data center, our own network. So we're free from the typical security guidelines that the rest of the corporation would impose on us. We can really do whatever we want in that lab. We've got a series of labs that we can use for theoretical whiteboarding sessions. We've got a series of labs that we can use for building code. And we have a number of offerings around that. In terms of what we do, we typically try and solve real-world problems through the use of technology. That's really, to sum it up. Now, how we do that really depends on the problem, and it depends on how advanced the thinking is. If it's at an early stage of envisioning, of innovation, what we'd like to do is work with a customer. The customer could be large, small, from any industry sector, to whiteboard and envision exactly what the solution could look like and how technology can be used to solve that problem. And that's really what we do pretty much all the time through what we call either architectural design sessions, or in some cases we take the outputs of that and move it on to a proof of concept engagement. We actually build out scenarios to a point where it's sufficient to demonstrate a real-world solution being solved for real without using smoke and mirrors, using technology back to a group of stakeholders to show them that it actually works, and then hopefully to then productionize it and agree funds for productionizing it after that proof of concept. Ultimately, we're about case studies. We're not actually about selling technology. I don't have any sales targets, so I'm not here to sell you anything in any of these offerings. What I am here to do is try and build case studies around how Microsoft technology can be used to solve these real-world problems, and how some of the leading-edge technologies that are coming out of research, that are coming out of the product groups, can be used to solve those problems in novel ways that hopefully give you as a customer an edge over whatever competition you have, or give you the ability to solve something you've just not been able to solve before. And that's really what drives us. And we always try and ensure that the technology fits the opportunity. We don't go out looking at solutions or problems to solve with a particular technology. We start with a problem and then fit the technology to it. What I would say is that we do kind of say that we only work with the latest stuff. So now, if we didn't work with the latest stuff, actually probably those problems had already been solved, so we wouldn't actually be called upon. But we are specifically there to look at some of the newer opportunities that things like the cloud is now solving for us. So we don't typically spend a lot of time working with stuff that's been around for a while. So how do you work with this? So email me, email Rob, and we will work through the qualification process to see if the offerings that we have are right for you. And clearly, there are many opportunities where you won't need our help, but there are other opportunities where perhaps the products haven't been released yet. And actually, one of the early ways of working with us is to work with groups in Microsoft such as the MTC. And so we can offer the ability to accelerate solutions at a very early stage. So please do speak to us. What I would also say is that we're actually free. We're a free resource. You don't have to pay for our time. Now, clearly, what we can't do is bring a whole room of developers and run a project for you. But what we can do is provide the facility to architect a proof of concept solution with a small development team, including some of your own developers potentially, or introduce you to a partner, so that we can at least get to the proof of concept stage, and that wouldn't cost any money. So it's an advantage that we do have. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks for your attention. I'm going to hand over now. If there are any questions, I'm around for the rest of the day. And you've got my details. Please feel free to email me if there are any questions at all. Thank you.
Just works.
We're on? Are you on?
I think so. Yeah.
I'm not Dave Brown. Another one. I'm Philip Young. Fred?
Hi, so I'm Fred Warren. Both of us are from our services organisation. What we're going to try and do today is take a lot of what you've heard, a lot of the sort of future technology trends, the things that you've been looking at, and you've been going, oh, my brain hurts. How do I make sense of this? We're going to try and unpack this and at least give a glimpse of, well, okay, here's how you can start looking at this stuff, and here's how we can actually start translating it and bringing it into something that's real, that's applied, and that's meaningful. And we've certainly got a view of how that works. Going back to what Andrew Blake said this morning, he talked about this great creative sort of setup within MSR that allows creative people to bounce off each other and have this fusion. But then there's that need to actually take a scenario, take a challenge, and actually bring that to bear. So the pure research very much flows into this applied research. And the applied research then obviously flows into what it is that we're trying to achieve.
Next slide. Okay, so for the next 30 minutes, or maybe 25, or if you're really lucky, the next 15, next smiling at me now, then we've broken that up into 4 sections. And the first section is going to be fast and loose. Hopefully not shallow, but also entertaining. And it's going to take you, we're going to race through 5 decades of transformative change. Is that right, Fred? Here we go.
So let's begin the journey. So the 60s, let's have a look at that. So from a technology point of view, you've got a first proof point of technology enabling or supporting change. You've got biotechnology, the pill, enabled the freedom, the loose sort of setup that we had, the free swinging 60s that people talked about, that social rebellion. You've got Dieter Rams' portable radio, where, again, it enabled people to consume radio and broadcasts very freely, very easily. They didn't have to sit in a room around a wireless set. They could actually take it with them. They could take it into the park. But you've got this weird sort of setup, because you've got people like Martin Luther and Che Guevara, who were those rebels, that social rebellion enabled by technology. But then you've also got the moon landing, which is part of that sort of Cold War tension. Let's get the USA to be the first to land on the moon. And whether or not it happened, well, it's up to you whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not. But the reality was that actually there's kind of a divide, because if you look at the advertising of the day, it's saying, look, what I want is a Coke. Smoke Camel cigarettes. Doctors do that. So it's people endorsing and talking about what it is that's important to get the message across. So you've got enforcing conformity, but you've almost got a line across it which talks about, well, actually, there's this social change, this rebellion against the 50s McCarthyism, against that confirmation of the society, but it's held over in the corporations that are there.
And then right on the 70s, those social progressive values continued. And then political awareness started to grow, and we had some pretty cynical moments. We've got this gentleman here, who used to run the United States, but that was made transparent through folks wanting to know more, folks wanting to understand more what media was doing. First colour televisions were coming to play as well as what Moon landing was previously. Okay? I guess. And I got to read from here because Fred gave me this quote to read, and I had to get it right. So Tom Wolfe coined the term the me decade in his article, the me decade and so on. And it was the start of that as well.
Absolutely. And so we think about Watergate, we think about Nixon, but actually in the UK, we had this idea that, Labour isn't working. There was political reform being engendered in society through the disruptions that were coming out of the 60s. And if we move into the 80s, again, from a technological point of view, start becoming personal. So we've got things like the Walkman, one of the most useful gadgets of the time. What it meant was I could, for the first time, I don't have to just take my portable radio, my Dieter Rams 1958 actually, but 60s kind of portable radio, and take that with me and consume the broadcast. I can actually take the music with me. So the 80s were often seen as that sort of miracle era, and technology helped support a lot of that transformation, that change. But things started becoming really personal. The Mac PC, again, one of the first sort of personal computers that really made it into a consumer society. So from a technology point of view, I don't know, Phil, do you want to talk about Mogridge and his laptop?
We can ask Matt, actually.
We can ask Matt about it.
Indeed. Right. But the reason that we've got that up there is because, yes, again, you've got this burgeoning of technology. So some of the themes that we're talking about through here is about how are the different threads coming together and what are they? And so one of them, of course, is that we've been talking about as products and technology. And so you've got this first laptop. I remember okay, it wasn't that old, but in San Francisco in the office where we were sort of experimenting with these new things. And so these were things that were also impacting. So as well as the social and societal change, then technology was coming to the fore as well. And I think there's a little story about how much computing power that had.
Yeah, if you take even like the Game Boy. So the Game Boy, just in a decade from the 60s. 60s we had the moon landing, 80s we have a Game Boy. The Game Boy had computing power, which was basically roughly equivalent to the computing power that was in the moon landing capsule that went to the moon. So obviously there was a lot of support infrastructure and a lot of computation power that was there to support the mission, but actually in the capsule itself, we've now changed the capsule and we're now into a Game Boy and we're using it to play because it's about me and I don't really care about moon landings. I want to play a game, I want to play Tetris and I want to annoy my friends by beating the score on Super Mario Brothers. We've got logo generation starting to come together and again it wasn't, don't trust politics, trust the corporates now. Trust MTV, trust Coke. The Coke advertising changes from that, hey, you want to buy a Coke because that's what I really want, to, well actually Coke beats Pepsi. Well actually Coke doesn't just beat Pepsi, Coke beats communism. Because actually, it wasn't necessarily Reagan who brought the wall down in the Berlin Wall. It was actually potentially Coke. It was consumerism. Consumerism brought down that wall potentially. Because what did people want in Russia? They wanted Nike shoes, blue jeans, and Beatles tapes. They wanted access to this rampant consumerization that was taking over in the Western countries. And when we move into the 90s, we've got the rampant sort of globalization starting to take hold. We've got cynicism starting to be brought in around the actual logos, around the companies that were there. So you look at the advertising again, so Nike shoes there. In the 90s, it's about Michael Jordan, it's about an affiliation. It's saying, hey, look, don't just buy our logo because we're cool, don't just buy the Coke. Actually, buy it because you know what? Michael Jordan says, just do it. Spike Lee says, just do it. But against that backdrop, we've got this sort of growth of cynicism. And the thing that's interesting is that we think, right, so Nirvana, those of you who were in the teenage years in the 90s, like myself, 90s Nirvana was, for me, that was it. It summed up all the misery and contempt that was happening in my life at the time. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. I get to wear DMs, black shoes, and lumberjack shirts.
Yeah.
But the thing about Nirvana is, if you think, was that musical innovation? Well, no, really, it was kind of punk without the rebellion against society. It was punk, basically the sort of the essence of punk, but very, very much introverted. It was taking it into me. And we think about the technology. We look at the Sony Walkman, now a CD player. Well, okay, the portable music has stayed the same. The need for portable music stayed the same. The technology's changed. But actually the logo and the actual branding is starting to diminish into the background. Enron happened. All of a sudden, we had this concept of corporate and social responsibility taking us through into the noughties. And with that corporate and social responsibility, we had this whole view of, well, actually, let's be a bit more cynical about advertising. Yeah, you're advertising Rice Krispies, but you know what? I don't quite believe you. Starbucks coffee's coming through. The information and age is there. We've got Guinness changing from advertising about, hey, have a Guinness because someone wants it, or have a Guinness because it's good, to talking about the experience, talking about what it was, what the brand values of Guinness are. You know, the quote from this, here's to you, Ahab, here's to your dreams. That's a very, very different slant, a different take. And just in 3 decades, we've radically changed that. And so again, into the noughties, we're taking this idea of corporate and social responsibility, because actually in 2001, 9/11 happened. And because of 9/11, we then started thinking, well, actually, there's a lot of uncertainty happening in the world. There's a lot of potential questions about how we run the world. It's people worried about what that next crash that's going to happen. What's that next event?
One as well, with SARS and those threats,
Yeah.
those physical security threats.
And all of a sudden, with things like SARS, you've got the idea of globalization happened, but we're now seeing the byproduct of globalization is that a virus can spread around the world a lot more quickly than perhaps it did just 2 decades previous.
By the way, we've got a Dieter Rams iPod there, haven't we?
A Dieter Rams iPod, absolutely. So we've got a Dieter Rams radio. So the design is going back and riffing off what was there in the 60s and the 70s, potentially. But we didn't say that. Sorry, Jonathan.
Could you please wipe that from the tape?
But leading out of the noughties, we've got social. And people say, right, social is the next great revolution. We had the information age at the beginning of the noughties. We then went into Facebook. Again, it's technology supporting change. But actually, the information age that was enabled by Google, well, Facebook, it's social. Social platforms are there basically representing what we do in our day-to-day lives anyway. It's just a digital form of that. Facebook didn't help or support or cause the Arab Spring. It very much supported and made it more easy for these people to get together. It was a different medium. Instead of the radio, instead of the portable players, actually then taken through to a social platform.
Yeah, so Fred was talking about the Arab Spring. Of course, you can see us leading up to, well, okay, you know, we started in the 60s because Andrew made us, you know, he said that we would remember them. But that's where we started in the decades, and because where do we want to go next? So if we're going from research next to how do you apply that or otherwise, then we were talking ourselves about this morning. Yes, it was this morning, thinking about, okay, well, what about this? Then what's next? And we've already had 2 substantive historic moments. You know, maybe the re-election is not that substantive as the Arab Spring, but again, they're pulling us through there. And so if there's some boxes there that are empty, and again, thinking about how we're trying to perhaps like bookend some of today. If we had the research next and we want to think about the now, dare I say, with risk of flattering folks, that change and the folks that will be filling those boxes are the folks in this room, the folks that actually are part of the business that will take some of the research that we've got, turn those into products and so forth. And I think one of the quite rehearsed so greatly, but what we're trying to do is draw threads into, okay, what are the things that are changing, what are the things that are chaotic? If there were threads which were about technology, then these are some of the technology changes. For sure, we can reflect also on the societal changes that are more or the same. So for example, some old design ideas that have been replayed for now as well. But one of the things which is most constant, and maybe Matt can back us up on this, when I used to work for a design agency, then folks would ask us, well, how do you predict the future? How do you understand what the future products would be? And then one of the things that we're latching on to, and I think actually the core theme of this, is that there is one thing which is constant. And that one thing which is constant is human motivation, the most basic of motivations. So beyond Maslow's hierarchy, if you understand, well, how do you step up to life? What are the responses that you have? And all of the things that we've been talking about, those cultural references, those societal ones, and so forth. They're reflections of the basic motivations and how they reflect, but according to from technological change. So that was, yeah?
But I think that there's one interesting idea with this, which is that effectively over the decades, you've got this rising sort of water table of social responsibility. So in the sort of 90s, taking into the noughties, we had this idea of corporate and social responsibility in business. But in 2010, we're now talking about socially responsible business. So how does that affect? And again, it's part of that rising water table requirements. everyone remembers sort of the environmental thing. Up until 2006, we all cared about the environment. 2007 happened, couldn't care anymore. We started shifting environment into sustainability, sustainable business. So we then compounded sustainable business with sustainable social business, and so on and so forth. And it's through these things that you can actually start seeing and charting, and it becomes pretty easy to see where some of this stuff might land, because you can look at the habits and patterns that were there. So we then slip this round to saying, right, well, how do I apply this? And especially in a commercial setting, how do I apply this? How do I actually work out where this makes sense and relevant to my customers, my consumers, the people that we're working with, the societies and communities we work in?
And that is part 2. So don't worry, we're going to slow down now. So we've been through those 5 decades, and we've only got a couple of slides each, so we are at time. How do we do that?
Well, so very simply, I think it's trying to maybe take this example. So here's an example. We've got an investment banker sat in an art gallery looking at a work of art and potentially looking at buying it. And then we've got this dude here with tattoos who's a mechanic from Newcastle. And if we look at that on a sort of maybe superficial level or on a first level, we'd say, right, so if we ask the question, who cares more about art? Who spends more money on art and art appreciation? We'd naturally potentially gravitate here. He's looking at a £10,000 painting, and actually that's really, really important. And if we were going to sell art, we would sell art to that guy. But actually, this person, as a percentage of their wage, probably spends more than the investment banker on art appreciation. And so it's through looking past and actually understanding what the real wants and desires of these people are that we could actually then start thinking about how we knit together technological change, societal change, and actually bring that back to the individual so that we can serve them better, we can provide consumer products and capabilities and experiences for the individuals.
Oh, she grows. So, business, technology, design. So it's the bringing together of those, understanding core motivations and so forth. And so I guess if that's our approach, I guess what we'd like to do is extend an invitation. So if we'd like to invite you to spend a day with us, if you're minded to do so, taking the last approach, maybe taking the scattering and the sort of chaos that you saw, but that's how we would sort of undertake what are the gnarly problems that you've got as a business, and actually how might we go through some process which takes some of the learnings and the research capabilities or resources that we have, as well as primary research, to undertake, envision perhaps some of the grand challenges, work through some of those grand challenges that you've got.
I think it's because at the inflection point of looking at the business or the societal aspect of it, the technology and the human experience, it's that inflection point between those three that actually gives us our differentiation, gives us that sustainable innovation. And a lot of us are talking about innovation at the moment and market disruption and market value. And again, if we look within the horizon scans and we look out and cast out our net on technological change, societal change, and so on and so forth, we can understand what's there. But potentially, we're just going to be competing for the market share that exists within the bounds of those parameters. You know, trend watching, things like that, is very popular at the moment. And again, lots of people do this and lots of people work on this. Your marketing and advertising organizations will be working on this. But when you're looking within the boundaries of that, what you're doing is competing against other people for that same market share, because they're looking at the same boundaries you are. And this is where Malcolm McLaren, who talked about, you know, the authentic process is potentially looking the other way, looking right when everyone's looking left. And so that's what really we'd like to invite you to do is come spend a day with us. We'd like to offer that maybe different perspective, offer a slightly alternative perspective, because it's through that alternative perspective that we starting to think about disruption and actually creating new market value and moving against the grain of the way our markets or the way our companies are actually moving.
So if you'd like to take us up, please speak to us, or I was looking for Andy, actually, Andy Spence, who's...
Right there, and David Hurst at the back. So yeah, do feel free to have a chat with them or us.
Rob Fraser as well.
But certainly that's the offer.
And we've got one more section.
So the follow-on event from this event that we've done today, the sort of Research Next, is very much about research now. So how do we actually start unpacking it? We didn't really want to tease you that we were going to give you the answers, but really we want to actually work through those answers as part of that next thing. How do we take a lot of this future scan and horizon work, and how do we actually relate that to the here and now? How do we actually bring that to something meaningful that we can potentially look at and unpack? And we want to share some of that approach, and we want to share perspectives from a number of different people on how that works. What is it that the unconscious mind is looking at that the conscious mind isn't looking at, and how does that relate to how we market and advertise? How do we create the link between behaviors and attitudes, and so on, so on, so forth?
Yeah, so again, just to clarify, so please be invited to, if you want to have a session, a day with us regarding some of the approaches that we've undertaken. And we've got this event as well, and we've got a few folks here that we hope to be sort of keynotes. I think that's the last slide before we invite Rob up.
So yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.